What can people who are interested in erotic power play learn from anarchists, and what can anarchists learn from them? I'm here with Andy Isaacson, um, and I'm Kathy Bartoli from the intimacydojo.com. And Andy, you're going to be talking about No Daddies, No Masters, DS, and power play as anarchists and access intimacy at Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit, which I love. It's a very interesting topic. And I think power dynamics is such a key topic right now in general. And I'm really curious, how are you, I'm not super geeky, but my understanding was like, isn't BDSM very hierarchical and you're supposed to have power dynamics? Like, how do you play with that? I'm really curious.
Well, hi Kathy. I'm really glad to be doing this with you, and I'm very excited to be talking about this stuff at Woodhull, because it's something that I spend a lot of time recreationally talking about, and talking about with my partners and friends, and trying to figure out, what does it look like to be engaging with power in our personal lives and in the world in the way that we do. And how do we do that in a way that's ethical, that's consistent with our politics, and that also is a good time for everyone involved. And when we're dealing with relational power in interpersonal relationships, there's a lot of power going in a lot of different directions at all times.
There's society, there's political, it's that's one of the complexities of it for me. Like when I'm trying to figure out how much power I have in a given situation, I don't know what the other person's perception is, and like where are we all playing? So, sorry, just like
absolutely,
it's very nuanced,
and it's never one directional, and it's never linear.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people like to try to simplify the conversation about power and say, well, this person has more privilege than that person, and so that person and so has to listen to them and obey whatever they say. And try to make it this very simple of like who has the authority, who's in charge. And who needs to sit down and shut up. And I'm really interested in complicating that idea, because none of the ideas of power and privilege, as they were actually initially posited, have ever been that simple. And it's really appealing to try to make them simple in that way, because it sure would be nice if the world were a simple place.
It is, but I've heard it mostly described as in groups, like white cis men as a group have more power than white cis women, who have more power than black men for cis men. And there's but within each of those groups, I work in corporate, so I'm a white cis woman, and there's not many of us. There's a lot more men, male identified people, and cis identified, and yet I'm more powerful. I know I identify as more powerful than some of the men, and not as powerful as a lot of them. But there's it's like to say as a group, you're a brick and you're all fit into that doesn't really work.
Right. It's not actually useful. It's just comforting.
Yes.
And so I'm really interested in complicating the conversation around power and relational power and systemic power.
Yeah.
And I think two really useful tools for doing that are DS, power play, ways of relating with power in a way that's intentional and negotiated as practice for relating with power in an intentional and negotiated way in the larger world rather than just during sex.
Yeah.
And anarchist politics, which are about a bottom-up politic that springs out of mutual care and mutual aid, rather than trying to create hierarchy, because hierarchy makes things easier. I think about I grew up working in a barn and working with horses.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really strongly remember about horses is that they really want hierarchy.
Yeah.
If a horse doesn't know their place in the hierarchy of the herd, like when a new horse comes in or if they're in a new place,
it's chaotic.
They're really stressed out because they really need to know who to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not herd animals. Mm-hmm. We are interdependent, autonomous animals.
Yeah.
And that's really different.
We need other humans. We're social.
Right. We certainly need connection. But when we have access to the power that we as humans deserve, which is power with and not power over, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
we don't actually need hierarchy because we can identify what to do collectively rather than hierarchically. And so transforming the way that we deal with power in the world by transforming the way that we deal with power in our personal lives. We practice having power consensually, negotiatedly, and based in mutual care and aid in DS in order to more effectively implement that same interaction with power as we move through the world.
Yeah, I get that. I've done role playing in therapy where we're kind of trying on roles and seeing how they feel and where we might be uncomfortable and talking about the discomfort or whatever. So is that similar to what you're like? I mean, it's erotic and pleasurable, but it also is allowing people to explore roles they might not have experienced before.
Right, absolutely. And I think we have in our culture, we have this enculturated equation of things that are pleasurable with things that are trivial.
Yeah.
Like if something feels good, it can't possibly be. Obviously, that's fake, and obviously a big part of what Woodhull is about is pushing back against that idea.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about ways of really cementing practices into our spirits, into our practice, I think pleasure is a great way of doing that.
Yeah.
It's how we teach our lizard brain, our nervous system, our whole bodies what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and people learn, like, carrots are much better than sticks unless you like sticks. People learn through pleasure in our system, and it's like, oh, I was in that role and it felt good. I got to experience this and associate it with my body feeling good, so maybe I'm more likely to step into other roles as well in other areas of my life.
Right. So I think about taking a position of intentional and negotiated power in the context of an intimate relationship, and I learn by doing that how good it feels to care for someone and to give someone the space to allow themselves to take in care, and through doing that, I gain tools for doing that outside of the bedroom, and expand my capacity to care for the people in my life outside of the context of sex, and to hold space for the people that I care for to be able to receive that care even when receiving care is hard, because I practiced during this really contained context.
Yeah, I love that because I'm a shy introvert, and so like I've had people all my life tell me you need to be more outgoing, and it's hard to do that. Like if you haven't embodied that in a safe space, like the role playing therapy I did was really powerful for me because I got to step into it very awkwardly without having to fight someone for that space, and have someone encourage me, and I could be awkward at it, and I could explore my feelings about it and how I wanted to express. So that I guess I'm thinking that might be somewhat analogous.
Absolutely. And this is the whole basis for the work of Augusto Boal, who created Theater of the Oppressed. He was a Brazilian revolutionary, I think, but I could be wrong about where he was working, in which case, sorry. But he did this practice called Theater of the Oppressed, where he identified theater as rehearsal for revolution. And he would put his actors, he called participants spect-actors, a mix of spectator and actor, because he said that the barrier between people who are participating with their bodies and people who are participating by watching should be broken down. He believed that by putting people in their bodies in the circumstances of role play, and being able to try out different experiences and different interactions, they could teach their bodies what it felt like to be in a space of revolution, so that when it actually came up, their bodies would know what to do. And I think one of the things that really gets neglected in a lot of the work that we do is involving the body, right? Thematic learning really gets dropped by the wayside because so much of our work, in advocacy is really thinky-talky.
Yeah.
It's stuff you have to be able to do it online. You have to be able to do it on the phone. So it can't involve somatic processing.
But we're in our heads. We're just visually and auditorily taking stuff in.
Right. And I think that neglect's a big part of how we learn. And I think neglect's a big part of how we can actually change our own practice in a meaningful way, because we can't learn new stuff unless our body learns it too.
Yeah. I have a lot of intellectual, like I did therapy for years. I have a sexual abuse history. So I did therapy for years, and I understood my problems really well, but I still had them. And it wasn't until I started doing more somatic work that, and EFT and other techniques that involve more of the body, that the actual things shifted for me.
Absolutely.
And I don't just want to understand these. I don't want to understand power dynamics only. I want to be able to be powerful.
Right. Absolutely. Like I think about the feeling of safety, right? How do you know when you're safe? What is the feeling in your body of feeling safe?
Yeah.
And I can say, I'm looking around the room and I can see that there are no threats here, and I know cognitively that I'm safe.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean shit to my fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And so I have to be able to learn somatically safety. And it's important for people to have the opportunity to learn somatic safety, because that gives you power to do what you got to do in the world without being constantly overwhelmed by anxiety and triggers.
So much of this work is so hard, and if you're trying to carry a ton block on top too, like, you can't.
Right. And like one way of learning somatic safety is by being in an intentional and negotiated power relationship where the trust is so great that when the person who you're with tells you you're safe, you're being cared for, I'm going to make sure that nothing hurts you, your body believes that.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. I love that. What are some of the things when you're negotiating and deciding this with partners, like what are some of the things you need to pay attention to setting this up very consciously?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that really need to come into any negotiated relationship dynamic, because like the difference between a DS relationship and a not DS relationship is not that one involves power dynamics and the other doesn't.
Because there's always power dynamics.
Right. It's just that one involves, an eroticized power dynamic, and the other doesn't, or isn't conscious of it. And so when negotiating any interaction with any partner, it's really important to think about the ways in which you are prevented from expressing your own needs and boundaries by the things you've experienced in your positionalities in your life. Because getting around those obstacles doesn't have to be your job alone. If you're able to communicate what those obstacles are, then your partner can help hold them for you and help hold your needs and boundaries, with you.
Yeah.
So it's not about not taking responsibility for your own communication and your own needs and your own boundaries, but rather about recognizing that mutual aid is an important part of personal responsibility. It's not supplanted by personal responsibility. And so in that, like when you're negotiating, right, and you talk about, well, I have this trigger when this specific, type of circumstance happens, it makes it really impossible for me to say I need things to stop happening. Right? You can tell a partner that, and then their care, the care that they take around that, is a kind of power with, right? It's them supporting your power with theirs, and it's a kind of access intimacy. Now, I'm just going to quick define that term, because it's not one that's an enormously large usage, which I think it should be. It's really cool. It was coined by Mia Mingus, who works in the Bay and does really awesome transformative justice work. So Mia coined this term to talk about the ways in which supporting your partners or your friends or your loved ones access needs is a form of intimacy. So the easiest way to explain this that I can think of is that, if I have a partner who has a need that doesn't work so well, and doing stairs a lot is really hard for them, and we live in New York City, you go everywhere on the subway. A way that I am intimate with them is that when we're going somewhere, I make sure that we have a route that only uses subway stations with elevators.
So that it's not solely on them, and they're used to most of their life having to be solely responsible for that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm having a hard brain time and my executive function's just all over the place and I can't get my life together, then one of my partners can sit down with me and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a to-do list. We're going to break it down into really small pieces. We're going to identify the order that we're going to do stuff in. This is access intimacy.
Yeah, that's
and it
beautiful.
has to do with both physical and psychological or mental health access.
Because we all have days where I know there's days my brain works really well, and there's other days it's on vacation and it didn't tell me.
Absolutely. And knowing your partner's or your loved one's access needs and intentionally caring for them, that's what access intimacy is. Mm-hmm. And it's my opinion that that's something that power play can and should be, because it's about using negotiated power dynamics to empower your partner in part by caring for their access needs. So I can say my making sure that we always have access to an elevator in the subway station is a way of being intimate with my partner. I could also call that service, right? Mm-hmm. I could also call that part of a DF relationship,
right?
And these different acts can have different meanings in power relationships in different directions. The same thing can be a dominant act or a submissive act, depending on who's doing it. It's all very fluid, but the important thing is that it's about using a critical and thoughtful and compassion-based relationship with relational and intentional power to care for each other, care for each other's access needs, care for each other's needs around the oppression that we face in the world, empower each other in our work and in our lives.
I love that. That's really beautiful. I have a question too about so we're talking about power being very nuanced, and I don't want to put words into I don't want to describe, so I'm going to share and you can tell me if I'm right or not. But, if we're saying power is very nuanced and we're also playing in areas we may not have a lot of skills, perfection wouldn't be the model I would apply to that. Is that correct? It's okay to be a little awkward and to try stuff out and say, oh, wow, that didn't work well. Or I realized that I crossed a boundary and I didn't mean to. How do you, it is very nuanced. It's very complex when you're dancing there. It can be beautiful, but
it's high stake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing when we do this stuff is tinkering in the exposed wiring of each other's psyches.
Yeah.
This is high stakes and high risk stuff, and a big part of caring for each other is being accountable when things go badly. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the culture that I find myself embedded in these days is very focused on an expectation of moral purity.
You can't make mistakes.
Never making mistakes, never fucking up, never putting your foot in your mouth, never trying something that goes badly. And I have opinions about that I could yell about for 60 years, and we sure don't have time for that.
We'd miss one home. That'd be very sad.
Yeah. But, I think about the relationships in my life that make me feel the safest. Mm-hmm. The relationships in which I have trust and I'm held and I hold. Mm-hmm. And that feeling of safety and trust doesn't come from nobody having ever fucked up. Oh, is it okay to swear?
Yeah, it's totally okay. I swear all the time. If they can't handle it, they should not subscribe.
It doesn't come from nobody having ever fucked up.
Yeah. It
comes from those fuck ups being held and worked through and cared for together.
That deepens if we're trying to be perfect, or I grew up trying to be perfect because I thought I had to be. And I was afraid to try anything, and there was no depth to the intimacy with people. It was like, because I wasn't only letting you see what I thought was okay it was very shallow. So
absolutely. I've been thinking about this in terms of community also, about like what creates a resilient relationship, or a relationship that's able to hold pain and conflict and trauma without breaking. Because I think a lot of the problem that we have right now is that we have relationships and communities that aren't resilient enough to hold pain and conflict.
There's a lot of pain out there, and people are doing their best, but yeah, it's hard when things happen.
Yeah, it's hard when we don't, like, we're acting as if we have these trusting and intimate relationships with people because we're in what we call community with them, when actually that doesn't imply anything about a basis of trust.
Right.
But when I think about what characterizes a resilient relationship, it's not I will never hurt you and I trust you to never hurt me, right? It's I love you and I don't want to hurt you, and I trust that you love me and don't want to hurt me, and I will not throw you away, and I trust you not to throw me away.
That's beautiful, and I think that's true. I've had shallow relationships, like I said, when I didn't have the resiliency, when I was still healing, and I needed them to be perfect, and they messed up, and I didn't have the room to say, wow, you're human. I needed them to be something different, and they couldn't be that. But I love, we're going to all fuck up, but we're going to show up and try to clean up as much as we can. And we care about each other.
I honestly, I have learned more about how to fuck up from DS than from anything else.
Really?
Because you have to build so much trust and care to even get in the room.
Yeah.
It
has to be very conscious.
Right. This isn't true for all DS. Like a lot of DS, and a lot of images of DS are done
50 Shades.
They're done in a way that run parallel to systemic power dynamics.
And abuse. And
as such, they're completely unexamined. I don't think it's impossible to be, a straight male dominant person in a way that's ethical. But you don't see it a lot, because it's really easy when your shit runs parallel to what you've been being taught your whole life to go, yeah, I'm the guy, I'm in charge.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of reason for the average person to examine their privilege or their power, because everything flows that direction. It's like, yeah, this is how it is.
It's so easy, but if you are a man hitting women, and you're not being really thoughtful about what it means to do that in the context of a violently misogynist society, you just hit a man hitting women. It doesn't matter if you're wearing leather.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
well
said.
That's so much of what people think of when they think of DS, because in my life it's had such revolutionary impact, and I think it has such incredible potential for marginalized communities learning to give and receive care in a way that is scalable, that's genuinely scalable to larger communities, that, I want intentional relationship with power to be understood as something other than Christian Grey, because it's I think it's such important rehearsal for revolution.
Yeah, and I really love, again, probably not kinky, but wow, that's really the power dynamic, the exploration, and the ability to have that be embodied in sexual and just in a safe space where it's conscious, and we can both try it out and then talk about it afterwards. That's really powerful, and I love that you're sharing about it. I don't know if you have a little more time. I'd love to talk a little bit, how do you clean up? How do you, you're talking about these very nuanced relationships and power, and accountability is very important. Are there some things that you would encourage people to look into if there were, having things in place and understanding how some ways to go forward versus oh my God, I screwed up, and then our primitive brain is frozen and we're and then we're actually not helping the other person who might have been harmed by the process.
Yeah, I mean, I actually teach a whole class on this called
Oh,
How to Fuck Up Gracefully.
oh, I love that.
So keep an eye out for that at a future Woodhull.
Nice. Yeah.
But I think one of the big parts of it is that you have to, like, this is gonna sound a little dippy. You ready for something that sounds a little dippy?
Yeah.
You gotta breathe. I think in many cases, the first time that a person is clued into the fact that something they did was harmful, they panic, and the thing that they're experiencing is their sense of themselves being attacked. Because their experience of themselves is, I'm a good person, good people don't hurt people, therefore I would never hurt someone.
Yeah.
And so being told you hurt me feels like being told you're not the person that you thought you were. Your understanding of yourself as a good and kind and caring person is wrong.
Well, we put a lot of effort into, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about, oh, I think this is okay, I'm not going to hurt someone, but we don't always see all the layers of things that are happening. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's important to recognize that, like, in anything you're doing at any time, it is possible to step on somebody's shit.
Yeah.
And once you accept that it's just gonna happen, and it is more important, like, yeah, try to avoid doing it carelessly, but it is more important to learn how to deal with having done it than to prevent it at all costs, because that's how we grow. Like, if no one ever tells you, hey, that thing you said is dumb, you're never going to stop
No,
saying
I
dumb
want
shit.
people to give me feedback, hopefully gently if they can first. If I don't hear it, turn up the volume. And some people don't have if they've already had their toes stepped on 20 times that day and I step on the 21st, they may not be that gentle.
Right, and, like, that's fine, but also, when we're talking about intimate relationships that are already characterized by a lot of trust, I think it's different.
Yeah.
Like, let's imagine microaggressions for a second. Like, if I say something that's racist without meaning to, maybe I use a slur that I didn't know was a slur.
Right.
And my partner, someone that, like, I've been building trust with for a long time, that we have mutual care and intimacy, is like, hey, I know that you're someone that doesn't want to say dumb racist shit. Like, I trust that that's true about you. And so I thought you might want to know that you just said dumb racist shit. And I'm telling you that because I love you and I want you to be able to act in a way that's consistent with your values.
Yeah.
Right? That is something that characterizes a trusting and intimate relationship. I can't expect that from strangers.
Right.
Right? If I don't have trusting and intimate relationships with strangers, and feeling entitled to that kind of trust from people that I haven't built that kind of trust with is what would make me a shitty entitled person. Right? Like, when white people are like, well, just assume that I have good intentions. Why don't you trust me? To people that they don't know and haven't built trust with, that's a kind of entitlement.
Right.
But the thing that they're feeling entitled to is the kind of trust and mutual care that can and should characterize existing intimate relationships. And so building a kind of relationship where you can transgress, you can make mistakes, you can try risky things, and that there is an aura of trust and care enfolding all of it. That means that if something goes wrong, if you say something wrong, if you hurt your partner, that you have the resilience to work through it together. Like, that's something you have to intentionally create. You can't assume that it's there right off the bat.
Right. Yeah.
And once you have it, it just keeps getting stronger and stronger, because the more trust you create, the more trust you can create. And that's true in relationships, and it's true in communities. Like, once you get to a place where you're able to navigate landmines confidently,
right,
then think how far you can go.
Yeah, and you've learned how to clean it up together, like the smaller. Hopefully, you've had the smaller things before the bigger things, so you have a pattern. And like, oh, this I love the 5 languages of apology. The author Gary Chapman's very homophobic, sadly, but the concept is good. Like, different people like to be apologized or made amends to in different ways. So, and you can learn your partner.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like, I think a lot of what we're dealing with in the way that our communities are like fractured and diffuse is based in people acting as though they're entitled to trust and intimacy that they haven't earned.
I really like that. Yeah, I can see a lot of places where I've seen that.
And I don't think that it's a malicious or intentional choice. I think it's because when we talk about community, we talk about what we want community to be and not what it actually is.
Our communities there's not a set, like, I think people think of this community that's very solid, and we're actually a lot of little communities that float together.
Well, but actually, like, when we say, at least in my experience, when we say community, we're talking about like a group of people who have some identity or some activity or some political stance in common, that share something, and that are all in the same place or all doing the same thing because of that one shared identity or oppression or experience or interest or whatever. But that doesn't actually imply any sort of relationship between the individuals in that group. And so when you have that, you've got a group whose boundaries are defined only by the people that are thrown out of the group.
Yes.
And so we have communities that are not made up of like relationships, but that are made up of who haven't we thrown away yet.
And I prefer not to throw people away. I'll certainly set boundaries with people that are causing harm repeatedly and can't get but I prefer much more to bring people up and have people included. So
I don't think that it's a useful way of thinking about community, because it doesn't imply trust, but we act as though it is.
No, that's a really good point. It is. It's like the only way we know where the community ends is by who we've kicked out, and then that isn't a trust building thing, and we haven't really built an intimate relationship with all the members in it. But there is that sense of we're a community, we belong together, so I should trust you and you should trust me. Yeah. You've been really generous with your time. Would you share why did you choose Woodhull for sharing this topic? It's a great topic. I'm excited about it.
I've been going to Woodhull since 2010, I think. And I have a lot of affection for it. I think it's a really lovely interdisciplinary group that is diverse in specific ways that I don't often see, and so in those specific types of diverse. Now, I'm not to say that the group is always diverse in the colloquial understanding of the word, because it is, it does tend to skew white. It tends to skew in a certain age bracket. It tends to skew, in a certain income bracket. Like, that's not what I mean when I say diverse, but rather that often we find ourselves talking to the same group of people about the same stuff.
Yeah.
And Woodhull is different people than I'm usually talking to about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I like that. And I find that it's a really receptive place to try out new things. So this panel that we're doing, it's me and Rue Khan and Kate Diadamo and Ida Mandalay.
I know Ida. Yeah, it's great. It's gonna.
And we've never done this panel before. This is the first time. And we were just, we were a bunch of us were, I want to say, creating change or something. We do the circuit, and we were hanging out and drinking in our hotel room and yelling about this stuff, yelling about how how the idea of intentional power play gets so co-opted by people who are in positions of hegemonic power, and that it's such a different thing when it's done in a liberation-oriented way, and how like we were so mad that no one paid attention to that, and we were like, shit, let's go to Woodhull and talk about it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for putting this together. This is very like, even as somebody who's not kinky, I'm like, this is going to be such a great talk, and I can't wait to hear it. I
gotta tell you, I don't think you have to be. So when we talk about kinky as an identity, I feel like it gets really narrowed.
That's
and
true.
People think, if I don't get off on like being hit with a bat, that means I'm not a kinky person.
Yeah.
I don't actually think you have to be a kinky person in that particular way to benefit from having intentional power relationships.
Yeah, and I can see that, because I guess I do. I make kinky mean a certain narrow thing, but I do like that someone tells me, okay, I'm in charge now and we're going to play with that, or I can be in charge for a while. And
like, if you can imagine someone coming to you and saying, okay, so for the next hour, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure that you're safe, and I'm going to hold you in not just a physical way, but my spirit is going to hold your spirit, and you don't have to be scared for the next hour.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. I would never have thought of that as being in that play, but I can definitely see that.
That's what I mean when I say power play, is finding ways of holding each other that we can actually take in.
That's beautiful. Andy, thank you so much. I so appreciate your generosity. And if you're watching this, please sign up for Woodhull and come and see Andy and Ida and Rue. And who else was it? I'm sorry.
Kate Diadamo.
Yeah, it's going to be a great talk. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Kathy. I'll talk to you soon.